Rabbi Zilkazun saying began the Farbrengen this afternoon that today is Shabbos Mavochen Tammuz. Every month has its inyonim that the month is outstanding for. And for us, what is so special in the month of Tammuz? It is the inyan that we celebrate the day that the Frierdiker Rebbe was released from being in prison, and that was on Yud Beis and Yud Gimel Tammuz when the Rebbe was released. Actually, it began on Gimel Tammuz, earlier than Yud Beis, because on 3 days in the month of Tammuz. You see, initially when the Rebbe once said, on an occasion, I think it was once in Yud Beis Tammuz Farbrengen, the Rebbe once related that when the Frierdiker Rebbe himself once related the details of him being arrested, he said that on his file, initially they wanted Chas v'Shalom to kill him. Afterwards they decided that they would send him away for 10 years. From 10 years they reduced it to 5, and from 5 they reduced it to 3. So when they sent the Frierdiker Rebbe away to the city of Kostroma, he was sent away with the initial intention from the KGB that he should be there for a period of 3 years. The Frierdiker Rebbe left to Kostroma on the 3rd day of Tammuz. So actually, in a sense, it was already easier for him, because until the 3rd day of Tammuz, from 15 days in Sivan until the 3rd day in Tammuz, he was in a prison cell. So actually, the beginning of the Geula already began on 3 days in the month of Tammuz. But when he left on 3 days in the month of Tammuz, this was with an intention that he will be there for a period of 3 years. So actually, the Rebbe explained today that on Gimel Tammuz, when it really happened, nobody really knew to appreciate that day, because nobody knew that it's going to develop also into some sort of a Chag HaGola. Because if had he been there for a longer period of time, then it wouldn't have been so meaningful to us. However, later, when Yud Beis and Yud Gimel Tammuz, also it was on Yud Beis Tammuz that it was decided that the Rebbe would be released. He wasn't released till Yud Gimel Tammuz. It seems like Yud Beis Tammuz, and that year in Russia, came out to be some sort of a legal holiday. So the entire procedure of releasing the Rebbe couldn't take place until the next day. So actually the real Yontif, the day of celebration, is the day of Yud Gimel Tammuz. That is the day that is really set aside to celebrate for the inyan of the release of the Frierdiker Rebbe from prison. There is also something else which is very outstanding in the month of Sivan, in the month of Tammuz, and that is that Yud Beis Tammuz is the Frierdiker Rebbe's birthday. And this is something which was known prior to the fact of all the details of having Yud Beis and Yud Gimel Tammuz as a day of celebration for the Frierdiker Rebbe's Chag HaGeula. Simply because when he was born on the day of Yud Beis Tammuz. And the chshivas of the Frierdiker Rebbe being an only son to the Rebbe Rashab means automatically that this was already known, that this is the birthday of a Nasi B'Yisrael, of a future Nasi B'Yisrael. So all this applies b'negeya the specialty that we have in the month of Tammuz. And here the Rebbe referred to the Gemara. The Gemara tells us, Ein mizarzin elo lemizurozin. Whom do we rush? Who gets extra zirus, extra rush, extra caution? One who is on his own a mizuras, who is on his own. In other words, a person who is really on his own a mizuras, and on his own he's fast producing. So this is the person who it's advisable to give him extra rushing and extra cautioning, so he will produce even more. So Rebbe teach this Gemara b'negeya Yud Beis Yud Gimel Tammuz as far as we are concerned. In other words, Ein mizarzin elo lemizarozin. The day is already a very special day, and we are now entering this month. So it's very appropriate to remind us on this month on all the great activities which the Frierdiker Rebbe demanded from us and instructed us to do. So the most appropriate time to really think into this and get involved in it in a more deeper way, as we were until now, is as we are entering this special month, the month of Tammuz. And particularly it is known that the Frierdiker Rebbe writes a letter a year after he was released from prison. He writes about his imprisonment. And there's an expression which the Rebbe referred to already at many times, where the Rebbe writes, Loi oisi bilvad, goal HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Not only It wasn't something personal and private to the Frierdiker Rebbe. Ela koil asher b'shem Yisrael yechune. Anyone that is only titled Yid has an effect and has a shayches, has some sort of a contact to celebrate this inyan of Yud Beis Tammuz. And as the Rebbe stresses, the Frierdiker Rebbe uses the expression koil asher b'shem Yisrael yechune. Yechune in Hebrew means the word kinui. Kinui could mean even like some sort of a nickname. In other words, we're talking here about people who are not fully, who are not really fearing sich, whose attitude is not as a proper Yisrael. Yisrael to them is only a kinui, it's something secondary to them. It's like a nickname to them. In other words, this is not their real name. It's not their real means of identification. Yiddishkeit to them is something secondary. Even to such people, even to the one who is only B'Shem Yisrael Yechoneh, to him as well, Yud Beis Tammuz has a shaychus. And it was for Yud Beis Tammuz, in fact, the year after, which was the first year of celebrating Yud Beis Tammuz, that the Frierdiker Rebbe gave out a maimah that begins with the words of the Mishnah in today's Perek, in Pirkei Avos, and Perek Shlishi, Asara sheyoshvim va'iskim b'Torah shchina shruya b'neihem. So the Rebbe teaches today that when the Mishnah uses the expression Asara sheyoshvim, simply it means when 10 people sit and learn Torah, shchina shruya b'neihem, the shchina is dwelling amongst them. Rebbe teaches a deeper taich. Asara sheyoshvim va'iskim b'Torah. We know that there are 10 categories amongst Yidden. Pashas Nitzavim tells us there are 10 categories, the Torah says, beginning from Rasheichem Shiftechem, from the leaders, until Chayte Vitzecha V'Sheyev Memecha. So if we want to express ourselves in a way where we include all categories of Klal Yisrael, it's composed of 10 different levels. Mishnah here is talking Asara sheyoshvim va'iskim b'Torah. In other words, Torah has a shayches to each and every Yid, regardless of what level this particular Yid may fall into, whatever category one falls in. Everybody can be a yoshev va'isik b'Torah. The Frierdiker Rebbe, in a maimah which he gave out also for the celebration of Yud Beis Tammuz, there he also refers to this Mishnah, again showing that the inyan of Yud Beis Tammuz has a shaychus to all the 10 categories of Yid. So now that we are entering the month of Tammuz, we are benching the month of Tammuz, it is the most appropriate time to utilize this month for all the inyan in which the Frierdiker Rebbe stood for. The Rebbe referred also to the inyan of Yutas Kislev. Yutas Kislev, we know by Chassidim, is also celebrated as a very great yontif, as the Alter Rebbe himself describes the great nisim, which Yutas Kislev is. Alter Rebbe uses the expression Higdil v'hifli Hashem lasoy simonu ba'aretz. HaKadosh Baruch Hu has done such great and outstanding wonders, performing to the miracle of Yutas Kislev. However, the miracle of Yutas Kislev was one which came about in one sudden way. In other words, Alter Rebbe was in prison and went out of prison on the day of Yutas Kislev. However, the celebration of Yud Beis Tammuz went in a phase way. In other words, it went from step to step. First, it was the inyan of Gimel Tammuz, 3 days in Tammuz. Then we come to the day of Yud Beis Tammuz, 12 days in the month. And afterwards, we come to Yud Gimel Tammuz, which is the final step when the Frierdiker Rebbe was let out of Kastrama and released and permitted to return back to his family. All this has a shayches to the general month of Tammuz, regardless what Shabbos we read, what Kriya B'Torah we read on that Shabbos, and again, regardless on what date this Shabbos falls out to be. Naturally, a Shabbos Mevorchem Tammuz always has to come out towards the end of the month of Sivan. However, it can be on different days, various days. Again, the Kriya can also be, mustn't necessarily be Parsha Shelach. It could be one of the other few sedras which are close to Parsha Shelach. Now that we have Shabbos Mevorchem Tammuz, and Shabbos Mevorchem Tammuz is on a Shabbos when we read Parsha Shelach, and it is also on a Shabbos when the date, today's calendar date, is 23 days in the month of Sivan. So we must say that these two inyanim are also meaningful and have some sort of significance to the fact that all these inyanim are combined on Shabbos Mevorchem Tammuz. Shlach, means to send. Moshe Rabbeinu sent meraglim. However, the expression of shlach really does not apply to something nearby or something close or something which I have immediate access to. Shlach, the Rebbe Zalgazan explains, is an expression of sending someone to a very distant area. That is what the thought of shlach contains within itself. And there's an inyan of shlach which comes as a message to each and every yid. Each and every yid is told he has to reach out. Shlach. And not only in his immediate vicinity, not only in his own Dalet Ames, or in his immediate environment, or something, should I use the expression, some territory which I'm about to gain in the near future. This is something which the expression shlach would also not apply to. The expression shlach is really suitable to something in a very, very distant area. The same in spiritual sense, when we're using the term of shlach, we are referring that the yid is told and given koiches by Moshe Rabbeinu, from the Rebishter to Moshe Rabbeinu to each and every yid, to go ahead and extend himself and reach out as far as possible to bring Yiddishkeit to whatever place he can only bring. This is what a yid is told. This is what we derive from this week's Sedra. Shlach, a message to take with us, that it is our obligation to go ahead and shlach ourselves, send ourselves out, extend ourselves. The Rebbe later in the Farbrengen spoke at length also. And actually, may as well say it now. The Rebbe later in the Farbrengen spoke about the fact that this Shabbos is a Pegisha, and it's an appropriate time to refer to the general idea of Nitzchias HaTorah, the eternity of all the Inyanim in Torah, and the fact that we now are on the other side of the world where the Torah was given. We are on the Chatzi Kadar HaTachten, and the fact that we're talking about people who are living in a modern society thousands of years after Kabbalah HaTorah, and at the same time we here are demanded that we must follow all the inyanim which were given Am Matan Torah. And all this has a complete relevance to us as well, and we have to fulfill all these inyanim. And the Rebbe also referred to the idea of shlach, that we have to extend ourselves to anyone, to any yid that we know needs assistance. And just like Moshe Rabbeinu, when Moshe Rabbeinu sent them a raglim, he told them that they are to check out Eretz Yisrael, Hashmeinahi imroza. They should check out what type of land is it. Is it a land, is it soil that is very fruitful, that gives a lot, very fruit-bearing, gives a lot of fruit, or a fat piece of land? Or is it raza, is it a piece of land which is not as productive? The same the Rebbe says, the Medrash Chazal tell us that really what Moshe Rabbeinu had in mind, Moshe Rabbeinu did not have in mind to send the Yidden that they should check out just the economy of Eretz Yisrael. Moshe Rabbeinu immediately taught the Meraglim how the life of Yidden in Eretz Yisrael should be set. The life of a Yid has to be set in a way of Bechol Derochecha De'eyu. That in all of our inyanim gashmiyim, we have to constantly refer to the Rebbeinu Shalom. Kol ma'asecha l'shem shamayim. All your deeds, all your acts have to be l'shem shamayim. And naturally, we're talking all our deeds, not only in inyanim that where the spirituality in the inyanim is very obvious. We're talking about inyanim gashmiyim, things which we are involved in our day-to-day life, and in all these inyanim, it has to be obvious that we have we are Yidden and are doing it as part of our service to the Rebishter. And that is why the Rebbe says, when Moshe Rabbeinu told the Yidden that they are to check out the soil of Eretz Yisrael, Hashmeina hi imroza, is it productive or it isn't productive? Chazal say that they had to check out, is it productive, so that Yidden should be able to bring bikurim and trumas and meinseres, which this is what had to be brought from fruit that grew in Eretz Yisrael, or isn't it as productive, and therefore bikurim will not be able to be brought from this territory, because bikurim has to be brought from the best fruit, from the best grown fruit, and if a piece of land cannot produce such good grown quality fruit, then these fruit are not suitable for bikurim. The same the Rebbe teaches in the spiritual sense. They are Yidden that are shmeinim, that are productive, and they are Yidden that as yet are not as productive. It is the lesson that we take from this week's Sedre, that we have to extend ourselves, Shelach, to all these Yidden. And whatever a Yid may need, any type of assistance, a Yid may need Gashmiistic assistance, or as well as Ruchniistic assistance, to familiarize a Yid with the Aleph Beis of Yiddishkeit, to help out a Yid in Gashmis when he may need some type of Gashmiistic assistance. All of this is part of the message of this week's Sedra of Shelach. And just like Torah itself, it's the original source of Torah's Chazal tell us based on the pasuk V'oya etzloi omoin sha'ashuyim. The Torah is very, very high by the Rabbeinu Shalom, and Torah traveled a very, very far distance until Torah came down into this world and is accessible to us, and we, with our limited minds, can grasp and understand Torah. The same, the Rebbe says, has to be the idea of Shelach. Each and every Yid has to shlach himself, has to send himself also to a very far distant area. In other words, far distance mustn't necessarily be physical distance. It can as well be in spiritual distance. In other words, spiritual distance should not stand as a barrier from us to send ourselves to wherever needed, to bring ourselves to wherever needed, to bring assistance to any type of Yid. And just like Chazal tell us, that Torah was given in a midbar. And the reason for it was because a midbar is an open and public place. And therefore, just like anybody can just walk into a midbar, it doesn't belong to anybody in particular. The same Torah is accessible to each and every Yid. There is no Jew that can say that he does not have a shaychus to Torah. Torah is for each and every Yid. The Rebbe explained where we see how various nations that were in existence in the days when the Yidden got the Torah, the Egyptians and other nations and other tribes. Today, there is nothing left from them or of them. And the Mitzrayim from today is not the Egyptian nation, which was in the time when the Yidden left Egypt to go ahead and receive the Torah in Sinai. Why is this? Because why were Yidden successful to succeed and be an eternal nation? At the time, no other nation succeeded in holding out for so many thousands of years. It is only because Yidden are associated with Torah. And Torah possesses within itself this nitzchias, this power of eternity, which Yidden as well have, and that is why Yidden are existence. And the Rebbe says, even we find those Yidden who originally broke away from Yiddishkeit, and those were the ones that started the Reform and Conservative movements. He says even their families did not remain loyal to the Reform or Conservative movements which their ancestors started. Why? Here we see that eternity in Yiddishkeit applies only to true and proper and authentic Yiddishkeit. The Rebbe expressed himself, where do we find today the einiklach of those children, of those people who are heavily involved in the Reform movement or in Conservative movement? Today we find many of their grandchildren in the shtiblach and in Bata Midrashim with long beards and with kapotas. And this is something, so we see that these children or grandchildren did not follow in the footsteps of their parents. Why? Because their parents did not give them anything which is eternal. Torah, when Torah is altered, it is already not the same Torah. Torah in its eternity is only when it's the Torah from Sinai, this Torah which the Rebbe is given to Moshe Rabbeinu from Sinai, and Yidden stick to it and hold to it, and are holding on to it throughout the thousands of years. And this is what the message of Pasha Shelach has within it, the idea of reaching to each and every Yid without not taking into consideration the distance or how far spiritually we may be from this Yid. If there is a Yid that needs assistance, that needs guidance, any type of guidance, it is our obligation, if we are in a position to be able to help this Yid, we have to follow the lesson from this week's Seder and extend to these Yid. It is also 23 days in the month of Sivan. What is so special about 23 days in the month of Sivan? We read in the Megillah. When was it that Achashverosh agreed to change the decree which Haman convinced him to make, and to change it to what Esther wanted him to, and to be mevatel the Gezerah, which was Chas v'Shalom to take place on Yidden? This took place on 23 days in the month of Sivan. It may have not been celebrated till later, but when was it that all the messengers left the house of Achashverosh carrying the message all across the country that the decree has been changed and Yidden gained an overhand? This took place on this day of 23 days in the month of Sivan. So again, it's a suitable day. We know that each time when the Megillah uses the expression Hamelach or Hamelach Achashverosh, Chazal tell us that it really pertains to the Rebbeinu Shalom. And the Rebbeinu Shalom being referred to as Achashverosh because Achris Vereishes Shaloi. The beginning and the end are all his. In other words, Hamelach always refers to the Rebbeinu Shalom. So if the decree on Yidden was changed on this day, it wasn't only by the physical king Achashverosh. It is HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the real king, the Melech Malcha Amlocham HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who has brought about to this change. So today is a day when such a radical change took place for the Teva of Klal Yisrael. The Rebbe referred this also, that this we find something very similar b'negei the whole inyan of Yud Beis Tammuz and the Frierdiker Rebbe. We also find that was also something which came across very radical, in a very strong way. It was totally unexpected prior to Yud Beis Tammuz that the Frierdiker Rebbe will be released on 13 days in the month of Tammuz. We will be able to celebrate it as a Yontif. But it is only through the Chesed of Hashem that this took place. Same the Rebbe says, is the idea of 23 days in the month of Sivan. It's also something which was a tremendous ness from the Rebbe. So the lesson which we are to derive in from all these inyanim is now that we are entering a month of Tammuz again. It's the most appropriate time to get involved and heavily involved in all the inyanim which the Frierdiker Rebbe kept on constantly demanding from us and instructing to us and telling us, which is actually reflected in this message of Shelach, which the Rebbe discussed at length in today's Farbrengen. While talking about the inyan of B'chol D'rachecha Da'ayu, how in all our ways we constantly have to refer to the Rebbeinu Shalom, the Rebbe was portraying people who are extremely wealthy and have earned enormous sums of money, to such an extent, however, that what the Mishnah says, Pas ba melech toichal, we shall eat simple bread and salt, as long as we should be able to dedicate ourselves to Torah. These people, on the other hand, though they are so extremely wealthy, cannot live up to a standard even of Pas ba melech toichal. Why is it? The Rebbe explained because they were so heavily involved in their Gashmis the Kinyanim, and were not following the derech of B'chol D'rachecha Da'ayu, constantly knowing the Rebbe and all your doings. So therefore they have ruined their own health to such an extent that now that they are in a heart condition, they can't even eat a piece of bread coming together with salt. Pas ba melech toichal, which the Mishnah describes it as a meal, the extreme modest meal, of which the poorest person usually wouldn't be able to afford more than that. Which this is what the Mishnah describes, Pas ba melech toichal. Here we say, we find people who are unfortunately, they are in such a position that they cannot even afford, because of their health condition, whatever difference is it. But still they cannot afford themselves a meal that is described as the poorest meal in the Mishnah, Pas ba melech toichal type of meal, they also cannot afford. However, the proper way is, a person should not keep on postponing that when he will have riches, that is when he will do tzedakah, and that is when he will do things for community and for society and for other people. As we go along constantly in all our anyonim, whatever we are doing, it has to be done in a way of B'chol D'rachecha Da'ayu, in all our ways, in all our Gashmis, the Kenyonim, Da'ayu, we are commanded to know Him, who meaning Him, the Rebbeinu Shalom. Rashi in this week's Sedre, which the Rebbe touched on, as the Rebbe always stresses that when he learns a Rashi, it is with a big stress that all in Yonim and Rashi have to be first and foremost as far as Pshuti Shel Mikra. In the simple Pshat, not getting involved into any type of extra commentary. This is what Rashi's obligation is. The Rebbe Zal Gesundsein learned Kapitel in Kapitel Tesvav, Pasuk Lamet. If we look inside the Chumash, Pasuk says, "V'hanefesh asher ta'aseh biyad rama." If a soul that will go ahead and sin, biyad rama. Now, what means biyad rama? Means with a open, stretched out arm. What does this mean here? So Rashi immediately comments, "B'mezit," willfully. In other words, there are two ways of sinning. One can sin b'shoigeg. He does not intend to sin, but he didn't know that this is not permitted, or he didn't know other details. Just simply didn't know. Or there's another way of sinning, God forbid, b'mezid, that means intentionally. He knows that this is not allowed to be done. However, he cannot overcome his Yetzer Hara, and he goes ahead and sins. So the pasuk says, "V'hanefesh asher ta'aseh biyad rama, mina ezrach or mina geir," whether it is a geir or a born yid, es Hashem hu megadef. We will immediately see in Rashi what is the taich of es Hashem hu megadef. Pasuk goes on, "V'nichasa hanefesh ahi mikerav ha'ama," that this person, this soul, shall be cut off from the nation. Actually, what type of sin are we talking about? If we look through the psukim earlier and later, here we are talking about the sin of Avodah Zarah. And for the sin of Avodah Zarah, this is the einish, the punishment, which the Torah says, "V'nichasa hanefesh ahi mikerav ha'ama." If we look into Rashi, Rashi comments biyad rama b'mezid. Rabbi explained, actually the expression of biyad rama is already found in the Torah, prior to Parashat Shelach. Bnei Yisrael, yotzim biyad rama. The Yidden left Mitzrayim biyad rama, with a stretched out arm, with an open arm, very proud. So, as the Rebbe always stresses, whenever an expression is used in Chumash the second time, really Rashi shouldn't wait till the second time. Rashi should comment and tell us what the word means the very first time we come across this word. However, here we cannot apply the taich of biyad rama, which the pasuk uses when the Yidden left Mitzrayim, and taich here the same way biyad rama. There, it's an expression of proudness. The Yidden left Mitzrayim with stretched out arms. What is it going to mean here? V'hanefesh asher ta'aseh biyad rama. And what would be if he's not a chaytei biyad rama? So therefore, Rashi here is forced to comment in accordance to simple pshat. Rashi has to guide us that what does biyad rama here mean? It means b'mezid, willingly. Person willfully wants to sin. So one who has sinned with Avodah Zarah, b'mezid, the pasuk says, es Hashem hu megadef. What does Rashi comment? Mecharif. Whom did he embarrass? He embarrassed HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And Rashi is going to bring two psukim where we find the word mecharif, meaning embarrassing, meaning megadef. Rashi quotes a pasuk from Yecheskel, v'hoisa cherpod gufa. Right afterwards, Rashi quotes a pasuk from Yeshaya, ansher got funari melech asher. Very simple question Rabbi raises. First of all, why does Rashi have to quote two psukim? Why wouldn't it be enough if Rashi finds one other source anywhere in Tanakh which shows us that the word mecharef means megadef, means to embarrass? Rashi brings two rayos. But that's another question. If already Rashi brings, for whatever reason, Rashi is forced to bring two rayos, why does Rashi simply, which raya should Rashi bring first? If we are to look in the sequence, in the order as these psukim are said in the Torah, obviously Rashi should bring the first pasuk first, and the second pasuk afterwards. Yecheskel is after Yeshaya. In Tanakh, the Tanakh Yeshaya is before Yecheskel. Rashi here quotes the pasuk from Yecheskel before he quotes the pasuk from Yeshaya. Why is it? And we must say that there must be solid reason for it, to such an extent that the 5-year-old child who's already learning Chumash, the Ben Chumash Lamikra, should understand why Rashi gives preference to a pasuk from Yecheskel prior to a pasuk in Yeshaya. Rashi's not finished. Our Chachamim say a drash. In other words, Rashi immediately tells us that this is not pshat. This is something which falls into the category of a drash, of a drashe. What do they dashen? Mikan lemevorech es Hashem shehu bekoros. From here the Chachamim have learned that one who does the opposite of benching Hashem, Pasuk doesn't want to use, Chazal don't want to use the expression, but it means the contrary of benching Hashem, that he's also deserving an einish to be the punishment of koros. The Rebbe asks, why does Rashi have to get involved here with a drash? I mean, we could pass by the Pasuk Chumash and learn it and understand it very well and very simply. Rashi already brought us two rayas from two different psukim in Tanakh. What megadef means, that megadef means to be a mecharef, to embarrass. So if one goes ahead and serves Avodah Zarah, he has embarrassed HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that is why the Pasuk says that this person deserves the penalty of being v'nichas ha'nefesh ha'hi mikerav amo. Of what relevance to the understanding of Pshat is it to quote the Chazal that if one is a mevorech es Hashem, that he is bekoros? As the Rebbe explained, in embarrassment there are various categories. There is a category if a very chashuv a person, somebody very outstanding, embarrasses, then this embarrasses is very meaningful. One is very much offended if he was embarrassed from a very chashuv a person. That is on one extreme. On the other extreme, if one is embarrassed from a little child, it also antagonizes very much. That little child, he has no derech eretz, that little one, that he goes ahead and embarrasses an adult, he embarrasses a chashuv a person. So these are the extremes in embarrassment. However, when one gets an embarrassment from his equal, from one on his level, the impact is not that of a great one, as when it comes from a very much upper extreme or from a very lower extreme. Actually, we find it in Chazal. Chachamim tell us b'negei busha, embarrassment. Gemara uses the expression hakei lefi hamevayish. It depends who was the one that embarrassed. Who was the mevayish? If we look into these psukim, each of these two psukim, the one in Yecheskel as well as the one in Yeshayahu, is talking about a different category of embarrassment. However, the Rebbe stresses, though when an adult, a chashuv a person, is embarrassed from a child, it is very meaningful and very much hurting. At the same time, when one is embarrassed from a very chashuv a person, the hurt, the pain, the agony is yet more, is yet stronger. Actually, to summarize it, we're talking about three levels of embarrassment. One gets, if a friend tells us something, okay, from a friend we take it, from our person, our equal. However, when it comes from somebody very, very chashuv, Rabbi brought the example, if the child is embarrassed from his malamed, from his rebbe, he's very much hurt. On the other hand, if a very chashuv a person gets an embarrassment from a youngster, he's also very much hurt. However, the ish chashuv, the rebbe, embarrassing the child, is a very much stronger embarrassment. And that is what the pasuk in Yecheskel was talking about. The pasuk there is talking about receiving embarrassment from the Rabbeinu Shalom. Therefore, this is the highest level of one embarrassing. So if Rashi wants to find an example that the word megadef stands for mecharef, embarrassing, where do we find charpo gdufa, in the highest and the biggest form of embarrassing? This we find in Yecheskel. True, it's in sequence of Tanakh, Yecheskel is after Yeshaya, but this doesn't concern us at this moment. Rashi here is looking to cite an example where we find the biggest way of embarrassing expressed in the word megadeh. Where do we find this? In Tanakh Yecheskel. Pasuk in Yeshaya is talking about a lower level of embarrassment. So that is why Rashi brings that pasuk secondary. Asher gotfu nari melech asher. Na'oris, the girls embarrassed the Melech Asher, the king of Asher. So this is the type of embarrassment which we just portrayed, a smaller type of embarrassment where a little child goes ahead and embarrasses a very chashuv person. So that is why Rashi brings two examples, because it's two different types of embarrassments. And that is why Rashi brings the pasuk in Yecheskel first, because this is the larger one. And when one is Oived Avodah Zarah, he's a Mecharef or Megadef, he is embarrassing HaKadosh Baruch. Important. Of a simple person. Now if we look into the pasuk uses the expression Va'nefesh asher ta'aseh biyad rama min ha'ezrach u'min ha'ger es Hashem hu megadef. Question arises now to Rashi, why is there a need for the pasuk to repeat as Hashem hu megadef? Obviously we're talking here about somebody sinning in Avodah Zarah. So the pasuk says Va'nefesh asher ta'aseh biyad rama min ha'ezrach u'min ha'ger v'nichas ha'nefesh hi mikerav ha'am. We are talking, obviously it's self-understood that we're talking about one who is serving Avodah Zarah, and if one serves Avodah Zarah, he's a Megadef es Hashem, he embarrasses HaKadosh Baruch Hu. No question about it. But why does the pasuk have to stress it again? True, we find many times in Chumash that there's an extra stress on an inyan. Pasuk does stress something twice. However, it is it requires explanation. To explain this, Rashi comes on with the extra oido sherabisein. Chachamim have derived from this pasuk that if one is a megadef is a mevarech es Hashem, in other words, he says the opposite of bracha on HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that it's as equal as if he would serve Avodah Zarah, and therefore he has to be punished the same way. So in other words, with the oido sherabiseinu, as the Rebbe explains, it's a question which is not as obvious and not as strong in Pshuta Shel Mikra. However, to accommodate us on this question as well, this question Rashi does not find an interpretation for this question in the realm of Pshat. That is why Rashi has to come on to another interpretation, al Piderach Hadrash. Why taka these words repeated? Because from these words we derive an extra drasha. We derive from here another inyan that if one is a mevarech es Hashem, he's punished the same way he's punished because. As it's customary in the Farbrengen, the Rebbe also refers to the Lekutei Levi Yitzchak, which is the commentary from his father on the Zohar. And in this week's Sedra, there's an expression in the Zohar, Zakoi inin Yisrael ma'amin akum de'alm, that the Yidden have a special merit. The Kutchebrichu, Isre'i behu, ve'iskini behu, ve'ispoyer behu. Actually, it means that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is proud of Yidden. And this is what the Zohar tells us, that this is a merit, this is a plus to Klal Yisrael, the fact that the Rebbeinu is so proud with us. The Rebbe's father, in his commentaries, he was known to be a very outstanding Bal Kabbalah, gets involved why the Zohar uses three different expressions of praise, how HaKadosh Baruch Hu praises the Yidden. And naturally every word is extremely accurate and there must be some reason for it. So this is what he gets involved in explaining. The Rebbe today, this afternoon, raised a very obvious question. True that the Rebbe is very proud of us in the various expressions that the Zohar uses. But isn't there a much stronger association between us and the Rebbe than the fact that the Rebbe is proud of us? That's the strongest. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as we say, Yontev in davening, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has selected us from amongst all the nations, and He selected us and only us. The fact where HaKadosh Baruch Hu has given Himself away to us, and given the Torah to us, all this is obviously stresses much more the Rebbeishter's association with Yidden than these expressions in the Zohar that the Rebbeishter is inspired, who is proud with them. Fine, it's something very, very, very satisfying and gratifying to know that the Rebbeishter is inspired, but still aren't there greater expressions that show the association and the love from the Rebbeishter to Yidden. Briefly, how the Rebbe explained it this afternoon was, every word in the Zohar is accurate. The Zohar here is talking Zakoi inin Yisrael, me'amin akon da alma. In other words, he's putting the Yidden as the Yidden are mingled in amongst the Goyim. And the Zohar is saying, even when Yidden are amongst Goyim, still the Rebishter expresses and extends love to them to such an extent that he's proud, Isra'i, he's friendly and proud with each and every Yid. And this is already different Inyan. In other words, how Yidden are, in other words, the Zohar here is talking about Yidden when they are in an attitude not as it should be. Yidden are an hage, they are mixed in together with other nations of the world. Even though that, still the Rebbe never takes away his love from Yidden, and he's constantly proud with each and every Yid. The Rebbe always refers to a Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, and today it is the third Shabbos from Shavuos. But between Pesach and Shavuos we complete once the cycle of Pirkei Avos. Now that we are after Shavuos, we are on the third week, third Shabbos, and therefore we recited this afternoon Perek Shlishi, the third Perek of Pirkei Avos. The mere fact of number 3 in itself is very chashev and very outstanding when we're talking about Torah. Because Chazal tell us that Torah was given in the third month, the month of Sivan, third from Nisan. If we begin counting from Nisan, Sivan is 3. It was given to a nation who's composed of 3 groups, Kohanim, Leviim, and Yisraelim. Torah was given in 3, Torah, Neviim, Ksuvim. So actually the number of 3 is a very, very dear number to us when we are talking about inyanim that have a shaychus to Matan Torah to Shavuos. Actually, not only is it number 3, but when we're talking about number 3, we are also reminded on number 6. Why? Because we know that in the third day of creation, it is hukfal boiki toiv. The expression that Hashem realized that He's done toiv is mentioned twice in the creation of Tuesday. However, not only is it mentioned twice in the creation of Tuesday, it is mentioned twice in the creation of Friday as well. Not only simply toiv, but toiv miyoid, very good. So we find something in common between the number 3 and the number 6, that both are days, Tuesday and Friday, are days where the expression of toiv, the expression of good, is doubled, is mentioned twice. So that is why the Rebbe chose this afternoon to learn the Mishnah in Perek Shlishi and the 6th Mishnah, Mishnah Vav. And this is Mishnah Vav in the arrangement of our Nusach which we have in our Siddur. So this is how this was arranged according to the Alter Rebbe. We should not underestimate the division of Mishnahs. In other words, one may say, what relevance is it if it's Mishnah 6 or it's Mishnah 5? I mean, of what meaning is it if 2 Mishnahs are combined as one, or they're divided as separate Mishnahs? The Rebbe said it's very important to the extent that it's reflected in a halacha. If one is mekadesh isha, almanas, on the condition that he is well versed in Mishnah. So the question arises, al pi halacha, how many Mishnahs does one have to know to be considered well versed in Mishnah? So we see already that the numbers of Mishnahs are meaningful to such an extent that it has an effect on halacha. The Rebbe says that it's brought in halacha, if one is well versed in 3 Mishnahs, he can be considered well versed in Mishnah. The Rebbe brought to our attention this afternoon that there is a Mishnah in Seder Zroyim, something very strange and very interesting, where there one Mishnah is numbered, is titled Mishnah Dalet Hey. Something very strange which we do not find elsewhere in Mishnah. In all of the 6 Darim of Mishnah we do not find it. However, it's found once in Shas, and we must say that it is for a reason. One particular Mishnah, it's not divided into 2 Mishnahs, it's one Mishnah. And this one Mishnah is titled Mishnah number 4 and 5. So we see how accurate the division of Mishnahs is. So we shouldn't underestimate the chshivas of it. And the Alter Rebbe in his Nusach, the way the Alter Rebbe set up Pirkei Avos, is that Mishnah 6 is a saying of Reb Chalafte ben Doise ish kvar Hananya. What does he say? Asara sheyoshvim v'oiskim b'Torah, shchina shchuya b'neihem. When there are 10 people sitting together and learning Torah, the Shechina is dwelling amongst them. Here the Rebbe again referred to the Maimah from the Frierdiker Rebbe that begins with the words Asara sheyoshvim v'oiskim b'Torah. The Rebbe said, when did we have a Metzias, a possibility, where all of Klal Yisrael fell into the category of Asara sheyoshvim v'oiskim b'Torah? Now we know it is impossible. Some Yidden are learning, while other Yidden are doing other good deeds. Giving tzedakah, doing gemilas chasadim, davening, and so forth. When was it possible for all of Klal Yisrael simultaneously to be in a position of Asara sheyoshvim v'oiskim b'Torah? This was at Matan Torah. At Matan Torah, all the Yidden were there. Chazal tell us all neshamas were at Matan Torah, the neshamas that are future neshamas as well. Everybody was there. And everybody was learning Torah at that time together. So, again, another way where the Rebbe wanted to tie in this Mishnah to Shavuos, to the idea of Matan Torah. So, as he says, Asara sheyoshvim v'oiskim b'Torah, the Shechina is amongst them. How do we know? Shenema, he quotes a pasuk. Elakim nitzav ba'adas keil. Uminayin afilu chamisha. How do we know that even a 5 as well? Shenema va'agudase al eretz yisada. Quotes from another pasuk, a pasuk in Amos. And aguda is referring to a limit of number 5 people. Agudase al eretz yisada, meaning if 5 people together are learning Torah, it is also praised. The Shechina is amongst them. Then the Mishnah goes weiter. How do we know that even if 3 people learn Torah, the Shechina is dwelling amongst them as well? Shenema bekerev elakim yishpoit. Now the Rebbe points out that the pasuk which is brought as a raya, as a proof, that when 3 people learn Torah, the Shechina is amongst them. This is the other half of the pasuk which proves that when 10 learn, the Shechina is amongst them. It's one pasuk. Elakim nitzav ba'adas keil, bekerev elakim yishpoit. It is all one pasuk. So it says it's strange the way the Mesadeh HaMishnah, and this is the Nusach which the Alter Rebbe selected. Obviously, the Raya on 10, and which is the proof on 10, and the proof on 3 should have been together. Asara sheyoshvim v'oiskim b'Torah. Ushloisha sheyoshvim v'oiskim b'Torah. Shchina shchuya b'neihem. How do we know? Because there's a pasuk. Elakim nitzav ba'adas keil, bekerev elakim yishpoit. So from the first half of the pasuk, Elakim nitzav ba'adas keil, we derive that when the Rebishter dwells the Shechina on a adas, on a Eda, and ein Eda pchusa ma'asara, that's a limitation of 10 people, a minimum of 10. And then from the other half of the pasuk, bekerev elakim yishpoit, that is where we derive that when even there are only 3 people, the Shechina is amongst them as well. Why is it that the Mesadeh HaMishnah has interrupted the pasuk, bringing in minayin afilu chamisha, and the raya, the proof that when 5 learn Torah is from a totally different pasuk. It's from a pasuk somewhere else, a pasuk in Amos. And the Rebbe explained is that Asara sheyoshvim v'oiskim b'Torah comes as a klal. This is a general introduction. That when we find 10 people learning Torah, as we just explained, this was something which took place at Matan Torah, or even later generations when there's a minimum of 10 people learning Torah, Shechina shchuya b'neihem. Then the Mishnah gets involved into various details. U'menayin afilu chamisha, u'menayin afilu shloisha. These are shloisha. The number shloisha is very significant. So very, very meaningful to us. In fact, in the first parak of Pirkei Avos, that is where Mishnah tells us right away, Al shloisha dvarim ha'olam ha'omed. There are 3 pillars that the world stands on. That is one of the first Mishnahs in the first parak. The last Mishnah of the first parak in Pirkei Avos also concludes with 3 pillars, Al shloisha dvarim ha'olam kayim. So we see that number 3 is a very, very significant and important number to us. Other numbers, the Rebbe does not get involved in explaining details of other numbers as well. However, it cannot be that the Mishnah should discuss the greatness of 10 and the greatness of 3, which is a detail, it's already not a klal, it's a prat, and leave number 5, which is also a prat, to be discussed after number 3. Mishnah is going in an organized way. So the Mishnah cannot discuss number 3 before the Mishnah explains number 5. So that is why, true, the Raya comes from one pasuk on 10 and on 3. However, the Mishnah cannot combine it. First the Mishnah has to discuss number 10. After 10 we go, the next lower number is 5. After that the next lower number is 3. After the Rebbe finished learning all these inyanim, the Rashi and the Kotel Yitzchak and the Mishnah Novis, Rebbe says that he imagines that everybody is sitting through the Farbrengen and is waiting very, very impatiently to hear some sort of a comment from him, Benegeya, the inyanim that have transpired last week. And everybody is very, very eager to hear some sort of a comment from him. Rebbe says it's Shabbos, and to get involved Shabbos in these inyanim, especially we're talking Shabbos, the inyanim can be turned over different than what he said. And the Rebbe says that he's confident that there are people here at the Farbrengen, and it's very appropriate to this week's Seder. This week's Seder we read about Moshe sending spies, sending meraglim into Eretz Yisrael. He feels that there are meraglim here as well. However, there's a very major difference between the meraglim that Moshe sent and to the meraglim that are here at the Farbrengen. The meraglim that Moshe sent, Chazal tell us, ba'isa shah ksherim hayu. At the time when Moshe Rabbeinu sent them, they were kosher, they were Erliche Yidden, they were fine Jews. However, later when they came back, they brought back a wrong impression on Eretz Yisrael. He cannot say this Benegaya people that are here this afternoon and are looking for his words to misinterpret his words and misquote him and bring back something which he completely different said. And the Rebbe says it's known, unfortunately, that to go ahead and put up false witness and misquote him, this is something which is not very hard and it can be done. So therefore the Rebbe says he feels that he will not get involved in discussing none of these details. And above it, the Rebbe says we already have the psak from the Rabbanim, and what the Rabbanim have paskened for us, we have to adhere to an extent of hakdamas na'aseh l'nishma. This is how meaningful the psak of the Rabbanim is to us. While talking about the sin, the Rebbe brought the Rambam. But the Rambam says that when one has sinned, irregardless what kind of great sins one may have committed, still when it comes the time that he will be punished even for not doing an Erev Tafshilin as well. Erev Tafshilin is something which is Midah Rabbanan, it's not Minah Torah. If one wouldn't say, he's committed such great crimes, the small ones are not even going to be taken into consideration. It is not so, the Rambam says. However, the Rebbe says there's something else which is very much hurting him and creating a lot of agmas nefesh by him, and this is something which he must speak out about. And here the Rebbe spoke about the mikveh again. The mikveh that is being built, that was built on Union Street, the Rebbe says it is already 3 years that he's begging. 3 years, expression in Gemara is Shloisha Shni Chazaka. 3 years stand for the Chazaka. And for 3 years he's screaming and begging that the mikveh should be built to such a way that when people come to this neighborhood, they could be taken to the mikveh, and the mikveh should show that it's a model mikveh to convince and impress those who are as yet far from Taras HaMishpacha. Especially, the Rebbe says, this weekend we have guests here as well, to be able to take him into the mikveh, bring him to tour the mikveh, and they should be impressed with what the mikveh looks like. This yesterday afternoon, to everyone's surprise, the Rebbe rode over to the mikveh on Union Street Friday afternoon, did not walk in, but just walked through the outside of the mikveh and really inspected Albany Avenue and Union Street, the complete structure of the mikveh. The Rebbe today spoke out very strongly that he was there yesterday, he said. He was there the day before, because on Thursday the Rebbe went to the Yael. And he was very, very disturbed that he did not find the outside area, the front of the mikveh, clean as it really should be. The Rebbe says he found torn boxes there, and he found bottles there, and he found things which are really very unsuitable to to a place which should be completely beautiful and very attractive to attract people, and here he found to the contrary. The Rebbe says he knows that there are people that are going to walk away with various calculations, whether what should they do and who should correct it, and what should they do, and so on and so forth. The Rebbe expressed himself very strongly. The Rebbe says, for the agmas nefesh that he has, nobody even has to bother begging him mechila for it. How much it hurts him. Why? Because the Alter Rebbe already explains in Tanya, the Rebbe says that it is bashert for a person to have agmas nefesh. So for whatever reason, it is bashert for him to have this sort of agmas nefesh. However, he says, pardon? Agmas nefesh. What would be the worst? Distress. And this, the Rebbe says, there's nothing that could be done about. But what the reason he's talking about it is not because of his own personal agmas nefesh and the way he's very, very personally hurt by the fact that this is not corrected. He wants that it should be corrected. And the proper committees, the Rebbe says, it's not an issue of money. It's not an issue. It's simply something which those who are active in it and those who are in the committees have to make it their business to see to it that it should be corrected in the fullest extent, that it should be a real beauty and real outstanding thing to be able to bring in people. He says people are here, people probably may have been brought there on Friday or tonight or tomorrow, that the complete outside of the mikveh should be as beautiful as it should be and as it is supposed to be. A good tevach.